Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are live again, and all right, we are working on two more chapters tonight. Last night, basically, what we accomplished is I edited two chapters, then I created the beats for the following two chapters. I did not generate them last night, but I have generated one version of them since. I may have to try again. And what I'm going to do now is inspect what it gave me, see if it's up to my standard of what I want it to do, and then proceed to edit those two chapters and basically go through the same process. We might not get through everything today. This may be a case where I just edit the two chapters and then that's all I'm able to do tonight because I do have a hard stop a little before 9 o'clock. So I need to meet that, but we're going to try and do as much as we can. We'll just see how long it takes to generate these chapters, if at all. So this we're doing chapters 8 and 9 now. And by the way, if you've been watching with us, um, I've been surprised. A lot of what I'm doing now with each chapter is kind of the same thing I've been doing. So you're not necessarily missing much in terms of the generation and the technique. But I've been really surprised at how engaging this has been between me and a lot of the people that come regularly to just follow the story because I'm kind of reading things out loud as I go. And it's been pretty cool to see that happen. So cool stuff for sure. I'm going to, this is chapter 8, I believe. And let me just glance through it a little bit because I didn't really look at this too closely when I started generating it. Yeah, this looks okay. Let's see. Where does it stop? Say right about there is a good stopping place. And we've got 1,000 words. I'm going to run it one more time just in case. I think we could go with that because there's not much to this chapter. It's basically just a conversation. But I'm going to run it one more time just to see if there's any major differences. That's odd. I don't know how this one's going to go overall, but I really like this exchange here. I'm sorry, did you say Sherlock Holmes? Jonathan asked. The man inclined his head slightly. The same. The detective, Jonathan pressed. I have had some small notoriety in that area, yes. I love it. I'm definitely going to keep that for sure. There's some bits at the beginning that didn't quite go according to what I intended, but there's some good stuff there. Huh, this is pretty good. Yeah, I'm good with this. This is probably what we are going to be using. So I'm going to call this Chapter 8 Winner. Can't quite tell if anybody's watching. If you're here, say hi in the chat. Oh, yeah. This says I have live viewers. I believe it. Hello, everyone. We're just waiting while this finishes processing. I really like how it's writing Sherlock Holmes. I think it's actually doing a much better job than I could. Yeah, this, it looks like it even stopped in the right place too. Let's copy this. How many words is this? Oh, wow. 2,200. Way to go, Claude. I just wish you could be more consistently good, but way to go. So that's chapter 8. Let's go to chapter 9. And, well, first, I've already. So this one, if you saw the title of this video, this is what I was referring to. There seems to be, when it wrote this chapter is what I would call like more of a telly instead of showy type of chapter. This chapter was meant to show a large passage of time in the course of one chapter, like a month passes as they are traveling by boat first, then by train, then by carriage, all the way up to Transylvania and Dracula's castle. And I just talk about things in a much more telly kind of way where I'm just telling you what happens. I'm not actually in anyone's viewpoint. At least that's how I imagined it. And I gave it that idea with the story beats, and it gave me this, which actually kind of made it almost more of a montage. It was more in the deep point of view, going into like Mina's point of view, but then it would like show a couple of isolated scenes on the journey. And I think this could be a good example of one of those happy accidents that people talk about. And what I need to know, because during this whole thing, she's not that happy about the journey. And so there's moments like this at the end of this little snippet where she says the train continued hurtling through the night while Mina tried to ignore her worsening thirst just a little longer. Like little moments like that, I'm like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. So we get here, and this is pretty much it. And yep, this is right about here is where I'd go. Let's see what the word count is. Boom. Wow, almost 3,000 words. That's pretty good. I think we're going to call this one the winner. I may change my mind as I'm actually editing it. These will take a while to edit because they're longer. So I don't know how much we'll be able to get done. But that's the winner for chapter 9 for sure. Also, just so everyone's aware, tomorrow there will not be a live stream, nor one on Saturday or Sunday. So the next live stream won't be till Monday, but I do have videos coming out tomorrow and Saturday to keep you tied over until then. But yeah. So let's start going through and actually editing these out. I have a feeling, well, I shouldn't say anything, knock on wood, but I have a feeling that this is going to be some fun chapters to edit because of how many words it has. Just as a rule of thumb, this isn't always true, but as a rule of thumb, I found that the more words it writes for the actual scene that I wanted it to write, so not as in like it didn't continue on past the scene, the more words it writes for the actual scene I wanted, the better it tends to be. I've noticed that to be the case. So we'll see if that holds true here because I wrote a lot of words. So this part I know it got wrong. So Mina blinked at the tall man. His Sherlock Holmes. Remember at the very end of the last chapter is when Sherlock showed up. The Sherlock Holmes? For a moment, they just stood there with the man holding his perfect posture, hands clasped behind his back. No, I think he had a cane. The glow from the gas lamps glanced off his sharp, angular features. Before he coughed slightly and said, "Might I come in?" Jonathan blinked in surprise. He glanced over his shoulder at Arthur, who had stood from his own chair by the fireplace. Arthur stepped closer. Let's see. I'm not sure he stood by the. He was standing by the fireplace. Who had taken several steps closer. His eyes fixed on their unexpected guest. "I'm sorry, did you say Sherlock Holmes?" Jonathan asked. The man inclined his head slightly. "The same." "The detective," Jonathan pressed. "I have had some small notoriety in that area, yes." I love it. Jonathan hesitated, uncertainty written across his open features. He looked to Mina as if to ask for guidance. Looking to Mina. She studied the newcomer intensely, noting his keen gaze and economy of movement. Intently, sorry. Though unassuming in dress, but with his tweed traveling coat and softened felt hat, that's not what we described him as having. Get rid of that. His cool gray eyes flickered over the room, no doubt absorbing each detail. Yes, this had to be the famous deductive genius himself. Mina inclined her head toward Jonathan. Let him in. So stepped aside. "Please come in." Because I think Mina is the one that answered the door, and it seems to think Jonathan answered the door here. So we can just get rid of this. "Thank you," Holmes said politely as he crossed the threshold. Mina regarded him closely as he removed his hat and coat, handing them to Jonathan without glancing at him. Everything about Holmes suggested an intensely observant and analytical mind. An intensity that rivaled her own. Not a man to be underestimated. Arthur came forward, his face grave. His face confused. "How did you find us, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes' sharp gaze swiveled to Arthur. "A logical inquiry, but might I posit you a few sharper questions in return? The particular viscosity of the mud on..." Okay, so I got that wrong. I wanted Arthur to say some of these things. Was it the mud on one of our boots, perhaps? Arthur glanced at Mina. Perhaps a trail of blood? No, nothing so complex, said Sherlock. In truth, it was merely this. He withdrew a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket and handed it to Mina. Waistcoat pocket. She unfolded it to find her own handwriting gazing back at her. It was the note she had given the boy William several nights past, asking him to pass word to the tall man. No, not asking. In case the boy needed help again. I see, Mina murmured. She refolded the note and met Holmes' gaze directly. Then you must be the one who got William and the other children away from that horrid place. From those horrid people. Smugglers. Always go with the more specific term. I am, Holmes confirmed. Mina glanced at the others. It seems we have a mutual interest in the same dark occurrences plaguing London. In the same dark occurrences. Sounds too dramatic. What would be a better way to phrase that? Dark business. So it would appear, Holmes replied. He gestured elegantly with one hand. Might I sit? I believe we have much to discuss. Of course, forgive my lack of manners. Please have a seat. It has been a long night. Please have a seat, Mina said, waving him toward the cluster of wingback chairs and settled armchairs near the fireplace. She glided to her usual spot, gathering her skirts and sitting gracefully. She realized Holmes was watching her closely, taking in every detail of her movement and demeanor. She couldn't help but notice that Holmes was watching her closely. She returned his gaze steadily, unafraid. Holmes settled into the chair opposite her, steepling his fingers before his face in an attitude of attention. His keen gray eyes bored into her. I don't think we need that. There is a darkness moving through London, he began without preamble, his voice low and intense, an evil which preys upon the weakest members of society while the rest turn a blind eye. I see things, signs which tell me a cunning evil is at work. Which tell me that a threat unlike any I have ever faced before is here. The lost, the abandoned, the vulnerable, they are disappearing at an alarming rate. Mina nodded. We witnessed such disappearances tonight. 3 women, if they could be called such, took a young girl. No, that's not something that happened. Again, here's the trick with AI. You have to be the continuity director because it's going to invent things that you're like, that didn't happen. That's what William said. He was looking for friends of his. Yes, Holmes murmured almost to himself. Precisely. He leaned forward, fixing Mina with his penetrating gaze. In my investigations, I have tracked this evil to a cabal of 3 women, unusual women with abilities no human possesses. Your own encounter confirmed my suspicions. Tonight confirmed my suspicions. Mina straightened almost imperceptibly. So this brilliant man, just man, had unraveled part of the mystery already. Perhaps he could help them all after all. We believe these women call themselves brides, consorts to a very powerful vampire. Mina explained candidly. She saw no reason to lie at this point. And if the rumors were true, it would be near impossible to lie to this man. We've crossed their path before, though, let's say not we. I have crossed their path before, though never three altogether. Not until tonight. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. A vampire, you say? Most intriguing. His eyes gleamed with interest. Given the unusual gifts you yourself possess, I presume you survived the encounter? Mina stiffened. What gifts are you referring to? She asked evenly. A wry smile touched Holmes' lips. Come now, Mrs. Harker. Let us not engage in pretense. The signs are manifold for one who knows how to read them. His gaze traveled over her assessingly. Your complexion rivals the finest porcelain for its pale luster. Yet your fleeting smile reveals incisors just a shade too long and sharp. His eyes bored into hers. Eyes once warm, brown. Yeah, I don't think you would know that one. Eyes are an unnatural Arctic blue with a penetrating gaze and enlarged pupils even in the bright firelight. Mina sat very still, her expression neutral. She felt Jonathan shift uneasily beside her. Holmes continued, furthermore, you move with preternatural grace, your reactions just a fraction swifter than a normal human's. You have not breathed once since I entered, nor blinked for the past 5 minutes. That's interesting. Your posture is too erect, your skin too smooth for a woman nearly 30. Yikes. The signs point to just one rational conclusion. Rational, that is, in the rather unnatural world that we now seem to find ourselves in. He spread his hands as if the matter were settled. In short, Mrs. Harker, the evidence clearly shows you are now a vampire. A creature formerly thought only to exist in legend. A vampire. Ray of light. So you didn't really miss the weird thing. We're going to see more of it. I talked about it briefly, but we'll see more of it when we get to chapter 9. I'm about maybe halfway through editing this chapter. But yeah, it was a different kind of chapter in the beats. I sort of intended it to read a little differently than most chapters, and it ended up doing some interesting, unexpected stuff that seems to be probably a happy accident. I hope. We'll see. A charged silence descended on the room. The others stared at Mina, unsure how to respond. At last, Mina let out a soft breath, more reflex than necessity. Because, as Holmes had pointed out, she didn't need to breathe. Brilliantly deduced, Mr. Holmes, she acknowledged. I am curious to know how you began to suspect. Holmes gave a minute shrug. As a consulting detective, it is my business to observe what others do not. He tapped his fingertips together thoughtfully, as if deciding how much to reveal. Let us say that young William's testimony set me on the right track. After your encounter at the warehouse, he told me of the pale, golden-haired woman who moved like a ghost. An odd turn of phrase which piqued my interest. Holmes glanced at the fire as though marshalling the timeline in his mind. I then came across certain newspaper accounts regarding a Miss Lucy Western, deceased these 7 years passed under mysterious circumstances. The details we need not recount now, but connections began to form. His gaze returned to fix on Mina intently. Your paths and those of Mr. Harker, Lord Godalming. Is that who's Godalming? Dracula. Huh. Interesting. I didn't know that. Claude just extracted that from what it knows about Arthur Holmwood. Huh. Dr. Seward intersected hers, did they not, during a rather eventful period in Whitby, if I infer correctly? Man, I love Sherlock's dialogue here. This is great. Mina nodded silently. Holmes gave a grunt of satisfaction at this. We just say he gave a grunt of satisfaction. Thus, I had enough pieces to glimpse the larger puzzle taking shape. Tonight's spectacle at the auction house provided the final clue I required. Yes, I heard about that. My informants are quite good. Are quite punctual. Holmes stretched his long legs before crossing them casually at the ankles. I deduced the players likely had need of a consulting detective. Thus, here I am. He spread his hands as if it were the simplest sequence imaginable. Arthur stared at him openly. Astounding. Utterly astounding, Mr. Holmes. The detective weighed this aside impatiently. Oh, man, that's so, spot on. So I have been told, but time is of the essence. What we require now is not flattery, but facts. Let us focus our forces on the task at hand. He turned his attention back to Mina. You mentioned Dr. Van Helsing. I don't think. There appears to be one of you missing, however. A Dr. Van Helsing. Dr. Abraham Van Helsing. I am familiar with the Dutch physician and his unusual interests. Is he here? His knowledge could prove invaluable. At this, Mina hesitated. She clasped her hands before replying carefully. I'm afraid Dr. Van Helsing has... I'm actually going to... Something I want to do here... When I wrote the prologue, which was from Van Helsing's kind of viewpoint, I referred to him as Van Helsing the whole time, but that's like his last name, so most people wouldn't go around calling him that. But I thought it'd be cool if, from his perspective, he referred to himself as Van Helsing, and Mina refers to him as Abraham. I'm afraid Abraham hasn't been around, or has been abroad these past months. He thought it best to travel to stay at Castle Dracula itself to gain greater insight into our enemy. Her voice dropped. We have not heard from him since he left. A crease appeared between Holmes' brows. Unfortunate. He would have been a most useful ally. His fingers resumed their rhythmic taps. Nevertheless, we must make do with the resources at hand. I can offer my powers of observation and deduction, such as they are, but I confess, here Holmes faltered, a vaguely perplexed look entering his gray eyes. I confess I am at something of a loss how to proceed. Mina blinked in surprise. From the little she knew of Sherlock Holmes, she had not imagined him to be a man burdened by uncertainty. That did not seem like him to not have a plan. Holmes gave her a frank look. You must understand, Mrs. Harker, I am a man of facts, of scientific reason, but this, he gestured as though to indicate her own changed state. This introduces forces beyond my current experience. Magic, demons, creatures of the night. I have only read of such things in Gothic fictions. For the first time, Mina detected a note of doubt enter the detective's voice. I must adapt my methods to deal with such realities. Truthfully, I am not yet certain how. He regarded her intently as though she were a lock he had not yet found the key to open. Actually, I think we can get rid of that sentence. Put that there. Mina inclined her head, as do we all. This evil is new to me as well. Oh, here we have a together we can vanquish the evil sentence here. I'm just going to eliminate that altogether. We don't need it. Jonathan spoke up quietly. We cannot abandon our search now. Let's say we have to do something. What about going to Van Helsing instead of waiting for him to come to us? If he holds any answers, if anyone would hold any answers, it would be him. He met Mina's eyes. We should go to him, to Castle Dracula. Mina drew a breath, knowing he was right. The idea her initial instinct was to reject the thought outright. Castle Dracula was leagues away. It would take weeks to get there. And they were in the middle of a crisis now. Who knew what would happen now that the brides of Dracula had that flute, whatever it did. But she had to admit Jonathan had a point. Abraham was probably the only one who could find a weakness they could exploit. Secrets they desperately needed if they were to survive. She turned to Holmes. If you are willing, your powers would be invaluable in such a quest. Let's see. I think you're right, she said to Jonathan. We've been patient until now, but it's time to learn what happened to the doctor. We need him. Then she turned to Holmes. I suppose you would accompany us? Your powers of observation would be invaluable on such a quest. Holmes' eyes lit up as though she had presented him with the most tantalizing puzzle imaginable. Though she had presented him with exactly what he was hoping for. Indeed, I must confess I should very much like to see this Castle Dracula for myself, to observe. He trailed off, his active mind already bounding ahead to the possibilities, though he seemed to recall himself, refocusing before focusing again on Mina. If you would have me, I am at your service, Mrs. Harker. Mina smiled gratefully. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. We welcome your company and your aid. Arthur stood, his broad shoulders thrown back. I think he was already standing. Arthur rolled his shoulders. As if exhausted. I will begin making arrangements for a passage. At this time, I insist on coming as well. And this time, I insist on coming as well. His eyes flashed with protective flare. I'll not sit idle while others risk themselves again. Jonathan rose, also his expression solemn. Nor will I. We will see this through together. Mina nodded, a rush of affection warming her heart. For both of them. A rare rush of affection warming her heart for both of them. Very good, Holmes approved briskly. He turned to Mina. I shall inform Watson that I am required... I'll just say my colleague. That I am required abroad for some weeks. Then we can be off. He rubbed his hands together, his angular features alight with vigor. The game is afoot, it would seem. And a complex game indeed. Mina shared a knowing look with Jonathan. The battle was far from over, but she already felt emboldened. A lot had happened that night. From the fight and escape from the brides to meeting Sherlock Holmes for the first time, and now they were suddenly preparing for a month-long trip to Romania. What? There was a time when she was excited just from receiving a letter from Jonathan. Now she was at least partially responsible for saving all of London from monsters. How times had changed. And yet, she found she didn't mind so much. They were if anything, being a vampire gave her far more purpose than she had ever had before. And she found her eyes blazed with icy fire as she spoke. Then let us make for Transylvania and find Abraham. Then the hunt can begin. Something like that. All right, so we cut a couple hundred words out of that. But that was a solid chapter. Well done, Claude. Well done indeed. All right, let's move on to chapter 9, which is the interesting one. So, let's see, I have to go here and find it. First of all, it was long. Nearly 3,000 words. So what happened here, if we go look at the beats I wrote for this, like my first beat is they spent the next few weeks holed up in the first passage of that Arthur could book from Brighton to Romania, though it wasn't a very large vessel, and Mina had to stay below decks most of the time because she couldn't be out in the sunlight. Like that could have been actually the entire, like that could have been part of the script. It's a very tell and not show kind of sentence, which is something that you still want to have occasionally because you don't need to show everything, right? We always say show, don't tell. This is a case where you would want to tell more than show because we're kind of like passing a lot of time here. There's a lot of unimportant stuff happening as they travel from there to here. But what Claude ended up doing is it actually expanded all of this pretty successfully and made it like little scenes kind of in a like a montage sort of style in each little section of the journey and sort of showing Mina's attitude as the whole thing's going on, and it ended up being pretty good from what I've read. We're gonna read it a little deeper right now, but I think this is maybe a case of like one of those happy accidents that the AI just gave me something really cool and I'm just gonna let it do what it did and edit it down, of course. So let's go here. Chapter 9. Mina stood at the railing of the ship gazing out at the dark waters of the Black Sea. The night breeze lifted strands of her blonde hair, carrying with it the scent of salt and damp wood. So we're in the Black Sea. So we've jumped forward a little bit. She drew a cloak tighter around her shoulders, more for comfort than warmth. How different this journey was from the last time she'd sailed to Romania as a carefree newlywed embarking on an adventure with her husband. Now she returned under the cloak of darkness, the moon's pale light too bright for her sensitive eyes. Enough to illuminate every detail around her due to her sensitive eyes. Jonathan approached and stood beside her. Neither spoke. See, like, I didn't ask it to do any of this like conversation between her and Jonathan. None of that was there before in my instructions. Jonathan approached and stood beside her. Neither spoke at first, taking solace in each other's presence amidst the groaning of the ship's timbers and the splash of waves against the hull. Both simply stood there amidst the groaning of the ship's timbers and the splash of waves against the hull. So much lay unspoken between them. Questions and fears neither wished to voice. At last Jonathan broke the silence. How are you holding up? His voice was gentle, blue eyes filled with concern as he studied her face. Mina offered a faint smile. As well as can be expected, the confinements wear on me, but we'll reach Varna soon enough. He nodded, glancing toward the hatch leading below decks where she spent her days in restless sleep. I wish there was more I could do. I know this isn't easy for you. You're here, that's what matters. We'll say, we're here together. That's what matters. She placed her hand over his, where it rested on the railing. His skin was feverishly warm compared to her own. Strange how she'd never noticed such things before when their flesh had shared the same warmth. You don't need that. Footsteps sounded behind them, followed by the strike of a match. The scent of tobaccos mingling with the briny air. Sherlock Holmes joined them at the railing, pipe in hand. Miss Harker, he greeted with a dip of his head. His keen gaze moved between her and Jonathan, no doubt deducing much from their body language. We'll just say always in a state of observation. A curl of smoke rose from the pipe clenched between his teeth. I trust you are keeping well? Well enough? She repeated. In truth, the hunger was beginning to claw at her insides, but she kept her tone light. And you, Mr. Holmes, enjoying your voyage? This is very, matter of fact. We'll just say, oops. And you? His mouth quirked with grim amusement. I confess it has been rather dull. I hope our destination proves more stimulating. His sharp gray eyes glinted in the moonlight. We don't need that. I'm curious to see Castle Dracula for myself, given the unique accounts I've heard regarding it and its former master. Mina tensed. Even now, the sound of that name stirred a visceral fear in her blood. Mina nodded, but her eyes drifted for a moment. Every time she heard that name, it still unsettled her. Have you learned anything further that might aid our search? He asked. Jonathan asked Holmes. The detective took a thoughtful drag on his pipe. I'm afraid Watson's notes yielded little beyond what you've already shared. Yeah, so this isn't necessary. This is just rambling. There may be clues within that even the great Van Helsing overlooked. Mina frowned. I only hope the professor can be persuaded to help us again. If he is even still there. Yes, Holmes murmured. Extraordinary how a man of science could now shun all human contact. He exhaled a stream of smoke. But grief and guilt can change a person. I suspect his self-imposed isolation a form of penance. It is not in what I know of his character. He looked thoughtful for a moment before returning to his pipe. Mina lowered her gaze, throat tightening. Yeah, so a lot of this conversation is just sort of made up. So I'm just going to remove that. He nodded briskly and straightened. Now, if you excuse me, I want to examine those crates the cargo crew loaded at the first port. At the last port, our Russian friend seemed anxious to avoid any scrutiny of their contents. With an enigmatic quirk of his lips, he turned and strode toward the hold coattails flaring behind him. Yeah, see, that's... None of this is good. So, we were doing okay there, Claude. But not so great now. We'll see if it gets better once we shift to a different scene. You know what? I think we might need to run this prompt again because this isn't really that great. Or I'm going to have to rewrite large chunks of it. Okay, this is actually more what I was envisioning. Yeah, this is closer to what I was thinking. Except it's almost a little bit too telly. I may have to like combine bits and pieces of both of these. Which I don't like to do because it takes a lot of creative energy. I could try to like... We could try to say like do a little kit batching, which I'm not a super duper expert on it. But hey, we could give it a try. So right here is everything. Let's see how many words this is. 1200. Okay. So I'd like to take the two following versions of the same chapter and combine the best portions together. Go mostly with version A, but include key conversations from version B when appropriate. And we'll say version A, paste in the version it just gave me. Wasn't expecting to do a little kit bashing, but there you go. And you know, it'd probably be better to like put this in a note. So let's say version A. Oh shoot, hang on. Version B. This is version B. Okay, now I have both of them in a single prompt. Hang on. Let's see what it does. So far, it seems to be mostly drawing from version A. Right now, it's drawing from version B. Yeah, didn't do a good job of stitching them together, but we can probably fix that. I'm going to say try again and also include at least one conversation between Mina and Sherlock found in version B. While that's going, I can answer some of your questions. So, Fazio, you asked if Atticus is a software. Yes, it is. Atticus.io is where you go to find it. It was created by Dave Chesson, who also created Publisher Rocket, so it's like awesome. Yeah, this isn't doing the best job. I think I'm just going to have to go in here and just manually work with it. So we're going to delete this. But I think we'll run the main super prompt one more time to see if we can like get something in the middle between the two. Yeah, I think this is a little better. Yeah, I'll just take this, and when it gets to a section that I'd like to expand it, I'll just take that section, stick it into Claude, and tell it to expand that section. I think that'll be a faster way of doing this. AA. Sorry, that's all you've got in your handle there. Don't know your actual name. You asked if I use Winston AI for detection. Uh, no, I don't. I haven't tried it. I'm unfamiliar with Winston. You say that it's what the publishers use. To my knowledge, there isn't anything that's like widely used by any publishers in particular. But here's the thing: AI detection. It doesn't matter how advanced it is or who's making it. They all are notoriously bad, and they are all not going to get better, most likely. OpenAI even abandoned their efforts to create one because they found it to be too difficult of a thing. And I occasionally use originality.ai just so I can test it and be assured that I'm doing things the right way. And it usually brings me back like 90 or 99% original when it was almost entirely, if not entirely, created by AI. So they're very inaccurate. I wouldn't trust any single one of them. The only reason I use originality.ai is because of just curiosity, and it has a pretty good plagiarism detector, which I like to see sometimes as well. All right, this is definitely better than the one before it, so I'll be using this one for sure. We'll call this winner number 2. Chapter 9, winner 2. Robin, yeah. Dolly on ChatGPT is pretty awesome. Which, by the way, I wonder if I've like not had access to the new ChatGPT. I do. Okay. What what we should do? We should try this super prompt that we just got and see what ChatGPT does with it. I hear it can take it. Says creating a 500 paragraph chapter is beyond the scope of this platform. Well, at least it's taking me a little more literally, so I could maybe decrease. Oh wow, it's like giving me the same thing as that other one. Like, how do you fare tonight, Mina? I'm pretty sure the other one was just like, how are you holding up? As well as one cannon in such a place. Um, great excerpt. Now, can you write the whole scene? It doesn't have to be in 500 paragraphs, but should be thorough and in the style of a best-selling novel. It's definitely faster. I know the new GPT model with the huge context window. It's not only cheaper, but it is faster, and hence why it's called turbo. No, some of this isn't too bad. Oh, and now it's finished. I doubt that was complete. Let's see how many words it was. Yeah, 500 words. That's the thing I like about Claude is it can give me. You have to sort of herd it a little bit, like herding cats, but you can get 2,000 or 3,000 word output with that. So 50,000 works still works, but I often get better results by asking it for a number of paragraphs. But they both essentially do the same thing. All right, let's go back to this. Back to chapter 9, back to Claude. I'll still use this. right here. How many words is this? 2,600. Okay. So this one definitely went into more detail. So I'm going to like put a big divide there, and I might use some of that again. But let's go ahead and start editing this. That's probably all we'll have time for tonight. They spent, ooh, a typo. Typo from, yeah, that is a typo. They spend the next few weeks, but this isn't in present tense. This should be past tense. They spent the next few weeks hold up in the first passage that Arthur could book from Brighton to Romania. Though it wasn't a very large vessel, Mina had to stay below decks most of the time because she couldn't be out in the sunlight. Mina paced the cramped cabin like a chain. We'll say most of the time, Mina paced the cramped cabin like a caged animal, her footsteps muffled against the creaking wooden floorboards. At least at night, she could get out and feel the salt spray on her face and the ocean breeze in her hair. But during the day, the sunshine filtering through the portholes was a constant reminder that those simple pleasures were lost to her now. That she was a changed woman. A very changed woman. Fazio. So Atticus costs $147 for a lifetime account. There is no subscription for Atticus, which is one of its strengths. Yeah, that's all I can say about it. I'm very happy with it. It's mostly, I mean, I do the writing in it. It's more of a formatting tool right now. And even if you use Scrivener or something like that, at some point you're going to need a formatting tool. The other one is called Vellum, but it's Mac only, and it doesn't do everything that Atticus does. So, yeah. Okay. During the long days cooped up in the stuffy darkness, she thought back to that faithful night. Yeah, we don't need these. That paragraph. At times, the confinement below deck made her feel as if she might... made her want to go mad. She tried to distract herself by reading or writing in her journal, but her thoughts always returned. To the unsettling events of the past few weeks. And it didn't help that the sailor's raucous laughter filtering down through the board seemed to mock her isolation. She clung to the brief moments when Jonathan was spent time with her, though she could see the concern in his eyes as he beheld what she had become. Though the rift between them was still not fully healed, he did his best to comfort her, speaking words of assurance, but she knew that no matter how hard he tried to understand, he could never fully grasp the agonizing limbo that was now her existence. Mina found Sherlock's company oddly comforting. The brilliant detective... We don't need brilliant. The detective had a clinical detachment that allowed him to converse with her in an almost ordinary manner. His keen intellect fascinated more than repelled by her vampirism. He plied her with questions, eager to elucidate the details of her abilities and experiences since returning. She obliged him as best she could, appreciative of the distraction. Though Sherlock was enthralled by the physiological changes wrought by the vampiric blood, wrought by becoming a vampire, hearing Mina recount the horror of her transformation gave him insight into the heavy emotional toll. For the first time, he began to truly comprehend the magnitude of all she had suffered and continued to suffer still. Mina was grateful for the chance to unburden herself to someone capable of listening without judgment. Sherlock may have been motivated mostly by scientific curiosity, but his clinical detachment. We already said clinical detachment, so I'll just say detachment was a welcome respite from the heart-wrenching mix of love and pity she saw in Jonathan's eyes. Ooh, it got that pretty spot on. With Sherlock, she could simply talk, vampire to detective, free of expectation or profound sadness. On the rare occasions when Mina was able to steal up on deck under the concealing shelter of her cloak, uh, at night or under the concealing shelter of her, we'll just say, a massive cloak, she clung to the shadows, yearning for the freedom she had lost. She watched the crew go about their tasks, envying their simplicity. They had no idea of the glorious sun she so desperately missed, having never lost its radiance. They had no idea of how lucky they were for simply being able to stand in the sun. Minia had taken the light of day for granted in her old life. Now the thought of never again waking to golden rays streaming through her window cut her to the core. Yeah, we don't need that paragraph. As the weeks dragged on, Mina grew increasingly on edge. The confinement wore upon her nerves, and being surrounded by the lively crew day and night made controlling her thirst a constant battle. In her darker moments, she wondered if she would be able to restrain the savage urges stirring. The urges. But she could not, would not become the monster Dracula was. Or his brides were. She would cling to what was her humanity, what was left of it anyway. Mina passed the time by pressing Sherlock for tales of his many adventures. Though initially reticent to speak of himself, a bit of flattery soon loosed the detective's tongue. He related case after thrilling case: the ingenious murderer who evaded police for years, the kidnapped heiress hidden in plain sight, the coded message that prevented an assassination. Mina hung raptly on every word, transported from her gloom. In return, she told Sherlock of the horrors detailed in Jonathan's journal, the demonic sisters preying upon innocent Lucy, Jonathan, the horrors she and Jonathan had outlined in their respective journals. The demonic sisters preying upon the demonic count, preying upon innocent Lucy. Jonathan's horrifying experience in the castle with Dracula himself, the depraved rituals in the bowels of the abbey. All were fodder for the detective's rapid deductions and macabre fascination. Everything came out. Sherlock was particularly enthralled by the accounts of Renfield, the poor lunatic so obsessed with his vampire master. Mina could not help but feel kinship with the brilliant outsider who, like her, was shunned by society at large for being different. While she had fangs and a thirst for blood, his difference lay within the peerless workings of his mind. But they both walked the line between light and shadow, belonging We don't need that paragraph. Yeah, it says 5K words here, Fazio. That's just because I've got like two versions of the same chapter here. Once we scroll down, and we'll get to that, and I'll probably delete it. Ugh. When Mina wasn't regaling Sherlock with Jonathan's diaries, her thoughts turned off into home and how much she missed the familiar comforts. The thoughts. Contrasting starkly with her current reality. High tea in the parlor, strolling through the blossom garlands, stealing kisses with Jonathan in the stream kiss in the glen. She ached. If only she could have the simple pleasure of sitting at her writing desk penning letters as sunlight spilled across the polished wood. Would she ever again know such humble joys? Unlikely. It was at its worst when the hunger returned. During those moments, Mina's thoughts turned down an even darker path. She fantasized about tearing into the crew's tender throats and reveling in the hot gush of their lives over her tongue. In those moments, she was truly terrified. Those were the moments when she became truly terrified. And by what she might yet be capable of. As a result, she doubled her meditations, clinging desperately to the tatters of her humanity. She would not relent. She could not. Mina grossly underestimated how long it would take to Romania, thinking perhaps a few days at top speed, but it was around the time that they rounded the Iberian Peninsula and went through the Strait of Gibraltar that she realized just how much further they had to go. Not only was it maddeningly boring below decks, but she was getting thirsty as well, and being confined in a ship full of rough sailors did not help matters. We kind of... So this actually would go better here. Yeah, this is all unnecessary. It's kind of just rehashing what we've done already. Here we go. At last, they finally made it to Varna, a port city on the Black Sea in Bulgaria. From there, Arthur found them a train to take them all the way to Bucharest. Once again, When they finally made it to Varna, a port city on the Black Sea and Bulgaria, Mina had to resist the urge to fall to her knees and kiss the blessed earth. The long journey across the sea was finally at an end, but her respite was short-lived. There was still much ground to cover over land before reaching Dracula's lair. Mina steeled herself for the next leg, though the necessity of traveling only under cover of darkness complicated matters. At least on terra firma, she could hunt. No. She doesn't. Traveling by rail was tedious. But Arthur was able to find a train to take them most of the way, which allowed Mina to stay out of the light. Traveling by rail was tedious. Mina had to shelter in a private sleeper car, the curtains permanently drawn. She peered through a sliver, watching the countryside roll past it. The train could not move swiftly enough for Mina's liking. She yearned to fly again, as she had on that fateful night, to soar swift and free above the earth instead of rattling along these iron rails. As she had the night she fought the brides. To soar swift and free above the earth instead of rattling along these iron rails. Part of her longed to simply take bat form and wing her way to Dracula's castle on her own power, but she dared not reveal but there was no way she could maintain such a journey on her own. She needed these traditional forms of travel as monotonous as they were. From Bucharest, they made their way to Bistrița, and from there hired no. The journey grew more ominous as the remote village of Bistrița came into view. As they traveled from the capital to nestled at the foot of the towering Carpathians. Mina shivered despite herself. The last time she passed this way, she was an innocent newlywed. Now she was returning as one of the damned to destroy the demon who possessed her soul. Nope. Dracula's dead. She had never wanted to return. The wary villagers wanted no part of escorting a group of strangers, one of them a mysterious veiled woman, up the treacherous mountain path to the accursed castle. Only when Arthur stooped to bribery did a single ragged coachman agree to convey them part way, but even his courage failed as the shadows lengthened. He refused to come near the castle itself once night fell. Mina could smell the man's fear. To him, she was some eastern sorceress come to rejoin her master. No. And, in a way, he was right to be afraid. She was no longer the gentle soul who last rode through the village. She had become a creature of the night with blood on her hands and vengeance in her heart. The darkness. As the coach hurried back down the mountain, leaving them to continue on foot, Mina felt the shadows gathering. We'll say the shadows gathered around Mina. She drew her cloak close against the night's chill, though it seeped into her bones regardless. Through the mist-shrouded trees, she glimpsed the jutting ramparts of the castle high above. Somewhere within these cold walls lurked the... you know what? I think we can cut this out. Why so uneasy, man? Sherlock asked as the coach jolted along the wooden path. Count Dracula is destroyed, or so I was told. What have you to fear from an abandoned castle? The coachman shook his head vehemently. Do not be deceived by such rumors, sir. The Count still dwells within those accursed walls. No one who ventures near the dread place returns untouched, if they return at all. Someone still dwells in that castle. Someone who doesn't want to be disturbed. He crossed himself furtively. Wolves howl around that castle at all hours, though no wolves roam these parts. And the wolves, sir, they howl around that castle. Unholy things stir. Evil magic is afoot. No good will come of this night's journey. Of it. Mina met the man's frightened glance in the fading light. Though his superstitions were primitive, when the coachman refused to take them any nearer, they proceeded on foot through the primeval forest. As dusk deepened into night, Mina sensed a brooding presence enshrouding the ancient castle high on its crag. Candlelight flickered in a high window. Through for the last leg of the journey. As dusk deepened into night. I think there was actually a section of this part here that I liked better than this. Yeah, this is better right here. I'll grab this and stick it in. Across from her and Jonathan. Soon, they approached the castle itself. Across from Mina and Jonathan, Sherlock Holmes observed the forested slopes with keen interest. Observed the forested slopes with keen interest. No detail seemed to escape his notice. The thickness of the tree line, the depths of the ruts in the road, the ominous shadows gathering between the gnarled trunks. What clues he gleaned from such things Mina could only guess, but she was grateful for his presence. His analytical nature steadied her own chaotic emotions. Next to Holmes, Arthur Holmwood sat stone-faced, jaw clenched, and eyes dark with remembered pain. Of them all, he had the most reason to dread their destination. Of them all, his experience with Lucy likely haunted him the most, perhaps even more than Jonathan's own experiences. Her own apprehension grew. What awaited them there? Would Van Helsing even would Abraham even receive them? Or was he even still there? And if so, could he offer any sliver of hope against as the coach crept around no, they're out of the coach now. As they climbed around another wooden bend, Mina caught a glimpse of crumbling towers silhouetted against the night sky. Breath seemed to freeze for all of them. Castle Dracula. The sight of it hit her like a physical blow. Nope. We're here. Jonathan's voice was taut as piano wire. Mina could only nod, choked by... The others had fallen silent too, watching that ominous silhouette draw incrementally closer. The horse's hooves... No. Then finally, they arrived. Mina gazed up softly at the towering spires and a mixture of anxiety and hope grew inside her. There was a light in the window. Someone was here. Actually, I think that's a good spot. We could stop it right there. And then all this, well, I'm going to scan through this bit right here. For those that came in late, this is the weird thing that Claude did. It took my, what I wanted for this chapter, which was kind of just to skim through all of the events that happened quickly, and it ended up taking that and kind of turning it into a couple of slices of life. But as I started going through it, I realized that the conversations were kind of just conversations about nothing, and it wasn't that great. But I am going to pause here and just scan through these conversations and see if there's any of it that would fit well with what we just finished editing. Yeah. This bit isn't too bad. So this is during the train part. At one point, she was visited by Sherlock again. And the topic of conversation turned to her own abilities, which Sherlock seemed to find fascinating. Haltingly at first, then with growing detail, she described the shocking intensity of her new senses, how she could see clearly even in near total darkness, and hear a heartbeat or a footstep from astonishing distances, and catch scents invisible to a normal human nose. Holmes listened intently, scribbling notes and peppering her with perceptive questions. He found it strangely cathartic, letting go of any pretense and speaking openly of her condition with one who seemed to reserve no judgment. Fascinating, he murmured when at last she fell silent. From what you described, I estimate your visual acuity now exceeds that of an eagle, your auditory sensitivity surpasses a bat, and your olfactory sense rivals that of a bloodhound. Mina simply nodded. There was no point in disputing his conclusions. Her new abilities amazed even her. Holmes tapped his pen thoughtfully against his chin. And you say direct sunlight causes you intense pain and weakness. At her affirmative, he scrawled another note. Photosensitivity. But I suppose it's not the oddest part of your condition. What else have you observed regarding your limitations? They spoke at length about her powers and flaws. Holmes listened. By the time he returned to his seat several hours later, Mina felt utterly wrung out, but also strangely hopeful. Perhaps with Holmes' brilliant mind applied to the very mystery of her condition, she had a chance of reclaiming. And combined with Dr. Van Helsing's own intellect, perhaps they could discover a cure, or at least a way for her to live a more normal life. But did she even want that? It was a disturbing thought. The train continued hurtling through the night while Mina tried to ignore her worsening thirst just a little longer. The journey grew more ominous as they traveled. Okay, and that's it. So now I'm going to delete all of this, which leaves us with just under 2,000 words. That's good. Let's see. On the whole, this thing is, we're at 18,000 words for the whole book so far. Not bad. Not bad. I'm guessing we're about a third of the way through. So this is going to be a little bit of a shorter book, but we can do that. Anyway, guys, I actually have to go pretty soon here. I'm meeting with a coaching client. So thank you all for tuning in. I see a lot of you have been really busy in the chats talking to each other, and that's awesome. So thank you so much for being here. I'm sorry I have to cut it a little bit short, but we'll get back to this on Monday when we're ready to write a few more chapters. So I will see you then. Thanks, everyone.